So back in 2021, we wrote an article on the principles of learning, basically looking at 10 thought leaders in education and listening to some of their work on the best way to learn. And we were learning from these, basically summarizing what they had to say, and then we distilled it down to the 5 principles of learning at WEquil School. And since then, these have been a big foundation of our whole educational philosophy. But the first one is this documentary called High Tech High. I think we watched this like right before.
Oh, I love that documentary.
Yeah, and it was basically looking at this very innovative model for this high school, and basically a lot of their philosophy was project-based learning. They talked a lot about how do we adapt education to technological advancements, and give access to things like 3D printing, but also a big part of what they did was essentially, I think it might have been every quarter, every semester, or yeah, I think something like that. Every semester, basically what kids did is they did this big project that they would then present to all their other class or their other peers, as well as their parents, and all the parents would come in and they would see whatever project the kids made for each class. And that's basically what we do at WEquil School, though it's on a much more frequent basis, right?
Yeah.
It's every week, to make sure that you're getting a lot more feedback, right?
A lot more feedback and a lot more room to be more flexible and all that.
Yeah. So that was a big part of kind of where we drew inspiration for that whole model. But the next thing we looked at was
Sir Kenneth Robinson's
TED Talk. Do schools kill creativity? I think that was like the most watched TED Talk at the time when we were doing this.
Oh yeah, it was very popular. And basically, I think the main point he makes is that schools kill creativity because it stigmatizes failure. So if you're afraid of failing, you're not going to be able to be creative and have new ideas. It's just...
And just try new things in general.
It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
And so that was the main point. I think he also talks about personalized education, and if you are... Well, everyone's different, so everyone's gonna learn different. This is rocket science. But sorry. And that makes a lot of sense. Personalized education is where you're trying to, if you want to grow creativity, which is the unique part of everyone, then you're going to have a unique system for everyone.
Yeah. Well, the next one is a video Jordan Peterson did on basically the importance of reading and writing, but writing especially as a means to structure your thinking, as a vessel for learning, because it really helps to basically just take your thoughts and structure them so you can see your own thought process on something. And it's something that we emphasize a lot to students, is like, this is not just for you to communicate what you already have thought. It's a way to structure your thinking. Like, what comes out of writing is going to be very different than what comes out of just thinking by yourself in your head.
Yeah.
So the next thought leader that we learned about was Paul Graham, and he wrote this excellent article on the lesson to unlearn. And I think that it is a very important point that he's making, essentially how schools create a structure. They create a game on, here's what you need to do in order to succeed within this defined environment. And because of that, students develop a lot of tricks of like, I need to note down the things that are going to be easily testable, right? The information that is verifiably true is more likely to be on the test versus more like philosophical, wishy-washy. It's not as easy to be, tested in a multiple choice kind of format, right? And there's just all these little, tricks that can be developed and habits in order to win and succeed within that defined environment. And because of that, what he noticed is that a lot of the applicants at Y Combinator would constantly be looking at the tricks and the shortcuts to succeed.
There's no tricks and shortcuts in the real world. You just got to create a good product.
In some cases, there are some tricks depending on how artificial the environment is.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But when it comes to startups, where it's literally, that's like
as real world as you can get.
Yeah, that's what he talks about, is how, like, that's probably one of the fields in which it is the least able to be gamed. Like, you just can't really game it, because let's say like they'll ask for tricks of like, how do you get investors to invest in your product? He's like, you gotta build a good product and like show that you have growth and that people like your product, right? And then they're just like, okay, how do you build a good product? Like, what are the tricks to building a good product? It's like, you have to
make it useful.
Yeah, you have to know what people want. You have to build what they want. You have to solve a problem.
Think these things through logically, and you can find what you need to do, but there's no
there is no trick. And even if you are able to like trick investors into investing in your product, if it actually is a bad product, you're just wasting both your time and the investor's time, because it's eventually going to fail.
Yeah.
And so he talks about this as the lesson to unlearn. If you're in this environment where it can't be gamed, and looking for those tricks can often make you do things that aren't actually going to help you in terms of finding success. So the
next one is Elon Musk on why he created a homeschool. So he had a different approach to education, and that's why I think he wanted to create his own. And his approach is based on problem solving, like hands-on learning, where if you are applying your knowledge and if you are learning through doing or solving a problem or creating something, then you're going to remember everything that you're learning. And so, yeah, I think that was the main thing he talked about.
Yeah, well, he had this example of, instead of, just teaching a class about hammers, it's like, let's use a hammer to build something.
Yeah,
right?
Well, I think to really illustrate that point, he says that it's like, well, a lot of what we learn, like maybe for using tools like a hammer or a wrench, then you would take a problem and then you need to solve it. Like maybe to put up our trampoline, I had to use an electric drill.
Yeah.
And then I learned about electric drill, and now I remember how to use the electric drill.
Right.
But if I had went to a class and it was like, here is the electric drill, let's talk about how to use it.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not going to remember. And so he uses that same kind of argument in that example.
Yeah. So the next thought leader is Steve Jobs. I think this was his, he gave a graduation speech, I think at Stanford, called Stay Hungry, Stay Foolish. I don't know if that is what it was called, but that was one of the main points that he said, was basically how you want to follow your curiosity, even if there isn't a defined reason as to like, oh, I'm learning about this because I'm going to do this as my profession, right? It's not like that's something that is evident as to how it's going to serve you, but he talks kind of about this concept of connecting the dots backwards. Like, all of these things, if you're curious about something and you really want to learn about it, it will serve you at some point in the future, even if you don't necessarily know how it's going to serve you. And as kind of the importance of following your curiosity as a means for innovation. And so I think that is also a really great point in terms of also just fostering curiosity, where it can help you have a much more flexible view of like, how can I explore the world? So there was also a TED Talk by Flurie on basically looking at a picture of public schools from, like 150 years ago and a picture now, and it looked exactly the same.
There
wasn't much difference. Now you have a smart board instead of a chalkboard, but it's serving the same purpose, and the whole structure is basically the same. So he also emphasizes basically a more individualized project-based approach, and kind of just the standard pitfalls of that learning structure, which we've already talked a lot about. And the next thought leader that we were learning about is Jeff Maggioncalda. He's the founder of Coursera, and he basically talks about the future of jobs in education. He talks about basically the fact that we are going to need to continuously learn throughout our lives as things continue to change. And part of what the concept that he was introducing with Coursera was microdegrees, where you don't need to like invest 3 years of your life to one thing, but as you run into different fields and skills that are needed for you to progress as an individual, that you can get microdegrees and continuously learn in ways that are kind of when you need to do something, when you see that this is something that is going to help you in whatever it is that you're doing, then you can learn about it in a very easy way.
Next is Sal Khan, who did a TED Talk on let's teach to mastery. So I think in public school, usually you would take a test and you pass if you get more than 50% on the test, right? If you get more than half of the questions correct. And that's generally the structure. And so if you do that, then you just keep going. But with a lot of subjects, especially math, things are always building on each other. And so it's like if you are building a house. If you are 60% finished, or if 60% of the foundation works, and you build on, and you're like, okay, it's all right. Let's keep going. And then you build the next level, right? And let's say you've got like 70% on that. Then you're just like, it'll work. And then you keep going. But since it's all built on each other, before you're able to finish it, most likely it's all going to crumble down. And that's the way it is with like math, where in order to understand something higher level, you are going to need to build on the information below. And if that information is not stable, you won't be able to understand. And so all your understanding of all of that is just going to collapse. And that is really, really bad, because then you can't learn math. And so he really emphasizes this point of teaching to mastery. Well, you need to get 100%. And once you get 100%, then you can keep building on that, and that's how you have a firm understanding.
Yeah, and learning at your own pace to however much time it'll take you to get to that 100%, which will be different for every individual.
You are going to want to take that time, because otherwise you won't be able to keep growing. You won't be able to keep growing, so you won't be able to keep learning.
So the last point here is about specific knowledge. We talk about this all the time. We'll probably need to do a separate video just on specific knowledge. But Naval Ravikant, he talks basically about how specific knowledge is something that can only be learned, not taught, and is learned through all the individual experiences specific to you. And that this is basically everything about you that makes you irreplaceable if you are able to leverage that aspect to add value in some way, to serve a need. And that if you leverage that aspect of you, a great example of this is actors and actresses, because they're the only person that has their face, their voice, and their understanding of how to play that character. And so you see, like, if let's say you're in the middle of a show or a movie, and
the actor just changes, you're just like
no, like you
what
can't
did you
do
do?
It. It's literally impossible to find a suitable replacement for these people.
And sometimes they will replace, and it just ruins the show.
Well, so that I think that's like a perfect example of specific knowledge, because run into that. But of course, there are many other ways in which that can be developed. And part of what he argues for is that should be a goal that everybody's striving for, is to find and grow that specific knowledge, and leverage your specific knowledge. So all of these have been
that took a while.
Yeah.
We just went through 10 of them. 10 of those lessons from all those different people. So let's shorten it.
Yeah.
And that's what we did here. We took these 10 different people and their lessons, and we shorted it down to the 5 principles of learning at WEquil School. 1, teach the problems, not tools. Should we talk about that?
Yeah, well, it's basically think about what are the problems in your life, and then you're going to inherently learn those tools while trying to solve that problem, versus just directly learning about the tool, because then you don't have the context, the motivation, the understanding of why you're learning about it.
Thank you, Elon Musk and High Tech High. No grades, iterate, and improve.
Yeah, so basically this is making the point that, like, you are never done creating something. It's like if you got 100% on your homework assignment, does that mean, oh, now I can't improve on my homework assignment, right? It's like, no, of course not. And how you want to continuously iterate and improve on what you've done, to continue to make it better, and that, that grades are a very flawed method of trying to indicate value, which is a lot of the reason why we have, these structures like Demo Day, where students can get feedback from other peers, and other people in their community about the value that they've created.
Thank you, most of the people on that.
Yes.
They all helped to contribute to that one.
Yeah.
We put it together, though. And next is share and learn with others.
Yeah. Well, it's really like, you're going to exist in a world where you have to collaborate with other people, and you have to engage with other people. You're going to add value to other people. So really helping to replicate that environment throughout education, I think, is very important, especially because that's where you can start to really get an understanding of what are your strengths and how can you benefit the world. Because what is the world, right? We're not talking about like blades of grass here. We're talking about people, right?
Yeah.
And so it is really, I think, a way in which you can start to get your bearings on, like, how does this world work? What do I actually need to do to succeed? Like, you need to kind of have those experiences, I think, with engaging with a lot of different kinds of people to start to understand that as a young person.
It's also a whole lot more fun when you're doing it with friends.
Oh, definitely.
Speaking of strengths, interests, and passions, build on strengths, interests, and passions.
Yeah, well, I think this does relate a lot to the specific knowledge concept of, like, what are you passionate about? What are your strengths?
Naval, Ravikant.
Yeah, but then it's also about, motivation and curiosity. What are you curious about? What gets you motivated? How do you understand yourself? How do you become excited about learning?
Mm-hmm. If you're talking about your strengths, interests, and passions, first of all, that's if those things are very unique to you, especially your ideas and your insights, that's something that a robot can't replace as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly is teaching is a great way to learn. I think this kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah. Well, it's basically like it solves 2 problems. The first problem is actually thoroughly understanding knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you, in order to teach to somebody, you have to, like, break it down to the foundations. But then the second problem here is understanding your own competence, because it's like in the real world, nobody's going to be like, okay, so you're really good at executing, but you could do a lot better at your management style. Like, you're kind of micromanaging your team, and they don't really appreciate that. Like, here's the things that you need to work on. Here's the things that you excel. Like, you don't get that breakdown. You need to understand that yourself. You need to understand what you're good at. And I think that teaching is a great way for you to understand your own competence, because you have to really break it down to that fundamental level. And if you don't understand, like, it's very clear to you, because the people that you're teaching to don't understand either.
Yeah. And one more thing is that when students are teaching, usually they just learn that. So since they just learned that, they remember what it's like not to understand. So it's easier to speak to that crowd and really see it from their perspective.
Definitely.
But anyway, those were the 4 principles that we have developed.
Principles.
Sorry, the 5 principles. I can count. The 5 principles that we have developed over this time that we've been thinking about WEquil School and running WEquil School, and I hope that this was helpful to you guys, and I hope that was interesting to the students at WEquil School to see where that all came from.